The Necromancer, Liliana Vess, retreats to her old academia, Strixhaven, looking to redeem her life, teaching future mages the responsible way to cast spells. But her past comes back to haunt the Planeswalker, as the Raven Man again calls for her very soul. Hey everyone, I'm Simon here for the Aether Hub, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today we continue with the story of Dominaria United in our first side story of the set. As we return to Dominaria, many Planeswalkers famous to this plane are returning home for one reason or another, and that's exactly where we find Liliana Vess in her story. Before we start the video though, I just want to shout out those who have become members on the channel. Channel memberships are the very best way that you guys can help support our content, and without you, we just wouldn't be able to keep this up. Members get special perks on the channel, including special member exclusive content. In fact, our very first video for members only just went up, and they'll be continually posted on a weekly basis. Click the join button above or follow the link in the description below to learn more about memberships here on the Aether Hub. And again, thank you all so very much. Now let's get into Liliana's side story, Homecoming, written by Seanan McGuire. Liliana Vess is enjoying her days as a Witherbloom professor at the prestigious magical institution Strixhaven on the plane of Arcavios. Liliana is no foreign agent here. It is within these very walls, and from these books, that she, as a young planeswalker, learned to craft the necromantic spells that she relies on to this day. Though returning to Strixhaven and teaching the next generation came to Liliana from tragedy. The life of a professor is one of predictability and routine. Class starts, students learn, exams are graded, skills are honed. It's not a life of adventure or danger, save for the occasional overzealous teacher's pet casting a spell they haven't yet the ability to control. But even then, consequences here were on a much smaller scale than Liliana was used to. From trading fragments of her soul to demons, to becoming a pawn of Nicol Bolas, to having a friend sacrifice his life for her, Professor Vess had a lot to atone for. It was here at Strixhaven she believed she could live a life of purpose, serving others to do something of meaning. The kind of life Gideon Jura tried to lead, the life Gideon sacrificed for her own. Though as noble a calling as it was, it's hardly exciting. And Liliana began to miss the pool of the blind eternities, the taste and feel of different planes, for all worlds were distinct. From the cold soil of Innistrad to the wild mana of Zendikar. What was troubling the Witherbloom professor as of late was her lack of sleep. Insomnia, not as the result of upcoming midterms, but a series of nightmares that felt all too real. While others could maybe write them off as merely dreams, Liliana knew differently, for there was a constant figure who'd appear nearly every night, a ghostly man who had been with her since she first started her pursuit of power. With that ambition starting at a very young age, when she was but a child at the Vess estate, learning to be a healer, the Raven Man was there, tempting her down a dark path with an unknown purpose. And again, today, he plagued her mind. She didn't know the Raven Man's identity. Maybe he was merely a metaphorical embodiment for her own disastrous decisions, or her own greed made manifest. He dressed in dated clothing, but despite the garb being old-fashioned, it was undoubtedly the sign of a nobleman. There was nothing to distinguish him as anything but a man, aside from his eyes, which glowed a sickly yellow gold. The very eyes staring at her through the night, speaking to her, again tempting her, as he had done so often in the past. The Raven Man was responsible for some of the most defining moments in Liliana's life. It was he who led Liliana as a girl to a concoction that would cure her brother of a mortal illness. It cured Jasu at the cost of cursing him as an undead lich. The Raven Man mentally tortured her, igniting her planeswalker spark. It was he who led Liliana to the Chain Veil, whose magic granted her great power but also threatened to destroy her. He even tried to convince Liliana to kill Jace Beleren, one person who actually cared for her. Though he too protected her when she was in great danger, and also didn't hesitate to leave her in the face of pure destruction. like when Liliana protected Innistrad from the Eldrazi Titan Emrakul. But without fail, the Raven Man would always return, and again here on Strixhaven, he appeared to her. Though Liliana Vess had mastered death itself, the Raven Man always had a way of prying away her walls and striking at her desires. He speaks to her, whispering of a life, of home, of the power she always craved. He wants to save her from death. Not the physical loss of her life, but the death of monotony. Death by meaningless paperwork. It was true, his words were accurate. She craved power, she craved novelty. The Raven Man beckoned his creation home, to the place where they first forged an unwanted alliance. The place where he had plucked her as a fresh spring flower, Dominaria. Find him, join him, and together they will be her perfection. As these nightmares appeared more frequently, Professor Vess realized she needed more than pure will to fend off these mental assaults. She needed some power over the Raven Man, and that power would only come from knowledge. If she could learn his name, learn his story, she would be better equipped to deal with his intrusion. Luckily, she had the greatest library throughout the multiverse at her beck and call, the Biblioplex. A collection of knowledge unparalleled on any plane, a gathering of work by countless planeswalkers sharing information on countless worlds, including the Raven Man's confessed home, her home, of Dominaria. Liliana began her search, looking at ancient stories of Dominaria's past. The Ice Age, the Brothers' War, the reign of Emperor Nicol, all had been well recorded by planeswalkers who witnessed these events. But if the Raven Man was real, if he was the lingering ghost of someone powerful on Dominaria, he should be rather easy to spot in these records. But no one stood out during this research. That's when the Raven Man again whispered guidance in her ear. He told her that she wasn't looking back far enough. The Raven Man was actually helping Liliana unlock the secret of his identity, explaining how once he was a great man, a powerful mage, the first of Dominaria to master death. He would help her achieve her full potential, but that required her to go to him, to free him. Liliana refused to be his weapon, and again turned to her books, but this time looking further back as he suggested. In an old tome with no author, titled A History of Phyrexia, she read of a Necromancer and learned the possible name of the Raven Man. Knowing that she could perhaps rid the multiverse of this small piece of evil, as Gideon would have, she travels back home to the Vess estate on Dominaria, to finally confront this lingering threat of her past. She planeswalks to the remains of her family's great house, feeling the pool of the countless dead Vess buried in the soil beneath her. The estate itself had certainly seen better days, barely sitting above the ever unstabling earth that was slowly eroding to marshland. When she was last here, she killed off the lich that had once been her brother, Jasu, who was then serving her previous demon lord, Belzenlock. Now the house remains silent, slowly sinking away. The Raven Man again appears to her, saying that she is almost ready for him. He looked to make Liliana a vessel for his power, but now she was armed with knowledge and a name, Limdal. At the mention of Limdal, the Raven Man chuckles, admitting that he hadn't heard that name in quite some time. A small confirmation that what Liliana had found was accurate. He was the first Necromancer on Dominaria, the first Conjurer of Death, the man whose soul was bound to artifacts since lost to time. It was Limdal who looked to unlock Liliana's true self, who, for her entire life, guided her to the moment where they would join, to become the most powerful mage throughout the multiverse. But Liliana had changed. She no longer cared for power at any cost, especially if that cost was her own individuality. Between Demon Lords and Nicol, she was done serving masters. Limdal explains that she was chosen because he saw what great potential she had. She was but the next link in a chain that spanned long into the past. Limdal's spirit had emboldened many mage before her. She had a vision, saw the first Dominarian mage to tap into the power of death itself, the first man to hold the strength of the grave in his hands and make it dance to his whims. Limdal. She saw his spirit, his power, passed down into his own student, possessing her, and then a new vessel not long after, over and over again all the way back to Limdal. She saw this ring change hands until it fell into those of her ancestor, who buried it here to hide it from those who would abuse it. But that wasn't the end. She saw the Raven Man, a piece of the ancient Necromancer's fractured soul, stirring in a vessel she knew all too well. Called to him from across the plains by a young woman's necromantic dabbling, she saw the same woman finally sever that link when she freed herself from the veil. A chain stopped cold by an absence of hands to hold it. That woman, of course, being herself. She had been intended for one more link in a line stretching back to that first, now nameless mage, her will subjugated to the remnants of his own, her soul remade in the image of those who had come before her. The ring whispered to her of power without limit, if she would just give in, just become the vessel Limdal crafted her to be. In a way, just become Limdal. She would still be Liliana Vess, but the parts of her that loved her students, loved Strixhaven, grieved for Gideon and for her brother, that part would fade away. Was this why he had called her to Dominaria? Limdal spoke of Liliana's past actions against Emrakul, against Nicol serving the Gatewatch. All these things had tainted her as a vessel. Then why bring her to Dominaria? Limdal spoke of others seeking his power. Evil beings who would not only destroy him, but destroy all of Dominaria, and everything else throughout the multiverse. The Phyrexians were searching for the remnants of his soul and power, and she needed to stop them. This time Limdal didn't only want to use her as a weapon for his own selfish desires, but rather as a weapon to protect all of Dominaria. And with that, the Raven Man disappeared. She used her magic to survey the land, reaching out through the ether to find anything unusual, anything that could frighten Limdal. Though her magic found the usual stench of death in the fields of Vess, there was something else. A strange abomination, neither living nor dead. Not corruption, but a stain on the invisible fabric of Dominaria. This was the threat Limdal had warned her about, and what she now sought. She walked the black moors once owned by her family, as the stench of rotting matter faded from the air and was replaced with that of rusting metal. She pulled on the magical thread until she left the tree line, and a singular figure appeared. A core woman with chalky white skin, black markings, wearing tattered leather garb with tubes extending from her back. Liliana orders the figure off her land, but a deep grinding voice replied, saying this was their land now, and she should never have come. Behind her, 5 hulking monstrosities rose from the muck. The figures arrayed behind her had been somehow twisted out of true with their own natures, patched together from dead and living flesh at the same time. And the dead flesh did not kill the living, and the living flesh did not resurrect the dead. Connections of artificial tissue and that dripping, impossible oil held them together. The sight of them was repulsive and entrancing at the same time. They seem to have been crafted from different sources, human and elf and core and merfolk and others, dismantled and reassembled into something more efficient than the very sum of its parts. All of them had claws, or fangs, or scythe-like blades where their forearms should have been. Some had extra limbs, or mandibles, and they were watching her with dispassionate eyes. Her life or death didn't matter to them. They would kill her without consideration or regret. The mysterious Phyrexian woman senses the essence of the spirit she had come here for. It has clung to Liliana, and they would have it. Immediately, Liliana suspects that they're after the soul of the Raven Man, but to what end? For what purpose? Information the Phyrexians were unwilling to part with. It was for the great perfection. Give them the spirit and free herself of this haunting menace. Let Phyrexia free her, the woman said. The figure introduces herself as Alas Ilkor. She is Phyrexian, but not totally completed. One, but also distinct. She is in this state for the task that must be done. That task being finding and excavating a relic that the spirit of Limdal was anchored to, buried here, on the lands of Vess. Liliana for a moment pondered her options. It was tempting to free herself of the Raven Man, to see her tormentor shackled to the will of Phyrexia, an enemy she had known from the tales of old walkers and written in Dominaria history. She knew how dangerous these beings were, however, and if they wanted Limdal, it would only lead to more devastation for Dominaria and the multiverse. As much as it pained her, the spirit of Limdal was kept in check within Liliana, not with these monsters. She declines Alas Ikor's offer. Liliana pulled at the dead that littered the swamps around them, fueling their bones and rotting flesh with animated life. Every creature who had succumbed here stirred at her command. Crabs, squirrels, horses, dogs, all crawled their way from the muck and attacked the Phyrexian invaders, biting with a hunger they had not known in life. The Phyrexians were truly warriors, built to kill, hacking away at large swaths of her zombies with ease. But the sheer number of undead began to swarm them, giving Liliana a chance to run. She hadn't lived such a long life by engaging foes stronger than herself. Elassiacor gives the command to chase, but not kill. The Necromancer's power was impressive. She would make a great addition to their forces. Sheoldred would be pleased with this gift. Liliana could have planeswalked away. She could leave Dominaria, her home, to its fate. Leave the remaining power of Limdal to the Phyrexians. But Gideon's death weighed heavy on her, encouraging her to do more with her life. Though her zombies wouldn't be enough to stop the Phyrexians, she had to do something. She reached out with her magic at the monstrosities, sensing the rotting flesh holding their metal frames together. Though her necromancy willed it to decay, the Phyrexians didn't know how to die. They barely slowed down. Her magic grabbed hold of the buried artifact of Limdal, a simple ring, buried in her family's graveyard and calling out to her now, promising her the power to destroy the Phyrexians. Limdal's ring came into the family Vess's possession, and her ancestor was smart enough to bury it deep as to lock its temptation away for good. Though the ring and the Raven Man promised her salvation and untold power, she willed the desecrated bones of her family to grab the ring and plunge it deeper underground. Further and further so that no Phyrexian could ever sniff it out. Her power forced it so far down that not even her magic could feel it linger. She turned and would face this threat herself. Elassiacor threw a javelin at Liliana, proving to be a superb marksman, but she let loose a wave of necrotic death that rotted the wood of the projectile, causing it to be unbalanced. Even still, the metal head of the spear hit Liliana in the shoulder. She then turned her breath of death towards the closing Phyrexian minions. Their flesh rotted away as if the passage of time was accelerated. Even their metal joints began to wither and rust. They slowed, jerked wildly, screaming in a metallic language. Death itself is the passage of time, and all things, even metal, yield to it. Though the Phyrexians were mostly machines, perfect in their eyes, there were pieces of their psyche that were still very much living. Using all the power at her command, Liliana assaulted these parts until the bodies that housed these monsters finally obeyed her. Elassiacor felt fear for the first time since her completion. What was Phyrexian would always remain Phyrexian, so she thought. But now her own minions turned against her, puppets on the purple strings of this Necromancer. This was no easy feat for Liliana. Even under her control, the will of Phyrexia was strong, and her subjects resisted violently. Once her magic stopped, they would return to hunting her, but this was enough to make a point, and force Elassiacor to retreat. Phyrexia was dealt a defeat at the hands of the daughter of Dominaria. Liliana had proven to herself that she was strong enough. There was no demonic contract, no chain veil, no Raven Man here helping her. Gifts she had all finally rejected. She was strong enough on her own, and now she knows it. She planeswalked from Dominaria back to Strixhaven, finally confident in her new path. The Raven Man still looked over her, a fragment of his soul still tied to the Necromancer. Though she didn't join him this time, she had accomplished what he had set her out to do. He knew that one day, he would pull her strings again and beckon her home. And there you guys go, the side story for Dominaria United featuring Liliana Vess and the reveal of the Raven Man. Now, to a lot of you guys watching, the identity of the Raven Man may have been a surprise, and I genuinely hope that was the case for you. But this was also a well-established theory in the Vorthos community for some time now. I even made a video on this theory that I'll have linked in the description below for you guys to watch, and I made that like 4 years ago. This was a community theory, so it's finally good to see all that theory crafting actually verified in this story. The bigger implications from this is that Liliana still has Limdal haunting her, and his ring still exists, although buried a little bit deeper. Will she be tempted to get it again should a fight prove too much for her? Limdal still seems to think that he has some influence over Liliana, and this is probably the case. And while she leaves Dominaria at the end of this story, will she return? Her home is being attacked by Phyrexians. She's seen it. She knows about the threat. why not defend it now? I assume this was just introducing her character to the Phyrexian threat before bringing her in as the story progresses from Dominaria United to future sets in this larger, overarching story. Anyway guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Again, I want to shout out the channel members who help to keep this channel going. If you're interested in becoming a member and getting some of those awesome perks, like weekly member exclusive videos, be sure to click the join button on the channel's homepage or follow the link in the description below to find out all of the perks that you get with becoming a member. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with friends, and until next time, see ya!